Hi everyone, it's former Captain Graham Hood in Australia. It's Friday the 15th of October in 2021 and it's time for me to give you a bit of a catch up on what's going on. Firstly, I want to thank all of you for the love and support that you've given us. Many of you have reached out to us in many ways and we really appreciate your love and support. I'm also saddened that I can't respond to every message. Please reiterate to you all that we're getting over 3,000 messages a day and sometimes more on various platforms. And some platforms we don't even have a chance to look at because we're just too busy. These are very trying times in the apartheid states of Australia, and the whole world is watching us at the moment. And many thousands of protesters around the world are protesting for your liberties and your rights. For many of you, today is a very sad day. Many of you have been terminated. Your employment is gone. You don't know what the next step will be. There are further and further draconian restrictions being brought on you. And I want you to know there are millions of you, not thousands of you. There are millions of you in this draconian situation that we find ourselves in. It's been very difficult to look at some of the messages. I've got to be honest, some of them have brought me to tears. It's clearly obvious to those of us who are speaking out to each other that many people have decided that this is just too much and they're ending their lives. The suicide rates are going through the roof. I want to address those of you who are thinking that way. Please don't do it, because there is always hope, there is always a solution, and there are plenty of people out there who can support you. We're looking at ways of trying to build some kind of support network, because the government surely doesn't want to. So that you will be supported in whatever way we can work out. So just be patient. But I urge all of you to come together in groups, to form up and be ready to support one another in every way that you can. I want to say that any self-harm is counterproductive to everything in your life. And any violence, anything contemplated in a violent manner should not be contemplated. We must be doing everything we do in love, trust and compassion for one another, despite our views. I just want to touch on one particular message I got the other day that really touched my heart, and I'd like to read that to you because I think it'll be summing up what many of you are thinking at the moment. This lady goes on to say that today I'm feeling sad. Today I am a second-class citizen in Australia. I have volunteered with one of Australia's most well-known mental health organisations for 15 years to help those with mental health issues. I've spoken at numerous organisations on mental health for free, ran support groups for women with postnatal depression and anxiety, and visited struggling new mums at their homes for free. I've volunteered my time with community groups for free, volunteered for years at a local primary school where I would sit and read with kids that struggled with reading and writing for free, taking kids off the street into my own home until they were back on their feet again and able to go back home for free. Counsel people on my Facebook page of over 20,000 for free. Given away countless copies of my mental health book for free. Wrote a column, a Q&A for a local newspaper to help those with mental health issues for free. But today I am a second-class citizen. I've paid my taxes my entire adult life. I've donated on a monthly basis to the Cancer Council for over 20 years. I've sacrificed and lost just like you. I haven't seen my family and friends for months. I watched my child's high school go down the drain. I watched my partner lose work for 18 months, and I watched my lifelong dream of becoming a flight attendant disappear. I sacrificed and stayed home just like you. I wore a mask even though I have an exemption just to keep everyone else happy. But today I'm sad to say I am a second-class citizen. I have always been kind to everyone regardless. I've never judged anyone for anything and accepted people regardless. I have always been there and available for anyone who needed help. But today I am a second-class citizen. How does that sit with some of you? Well, the truth is I know that the people who really needed to hear that are probably not going to be seeing it or watching it because they're too busy doing the other things in their lives now, enjoying their newfound freedoms. Many of the people who needed to read that were queuing up at the casinos in Sydney at midnight the other night to get in and start living their lives again, oblivious to the stress and the trauma that's going on around them by people who are making a different decision. Quite happy in the knowledge that their life's back into a normal situation again, at the expense of others who won't be, others who will be segregated in society, others who have restrictions placed on them, forced into situations where they have no income, losing lifelong careers, and the rest of the world, the rest of Australia, just seems to be oblivious to that. There are some people who will be high-fiving, saying that they took a shot for the team and, this is what we have to do in patriotism. Many of those will believe that firmly, and that's good. If that's their motive, that's good. But many will also be saying that to cover up their own inadequacies and their own lack of courage to be able to face the situations that they've been confronted with. Many people have different situations, and we have to understand that. There are church groups that I'm aware of as a Christian, where many leaders within the churches are promoting a medical procedure that a lot of people can't give consent to because they haven't had the required information that they need to make an informed consent. Many of those people in churches who have made a decision to follow the government narrative and do what they have done, many of them will be saying that they're doing it out of Christian love for their brothers and sisters. That is, unless their brothers and sisters have decided not to follow their footsteps and take a different path. It seems that for many in those situations, their love is conditional, and that's not Christ-like. And they will know what I'm talking about. There are people on both sides of the great no man's land that we find ourselves in who are throwing rocks at each other. But for many of you, millions of you, you find yourselves in the middle, and that's where I am. I've made a rational decision based on the information available, and I'll be sticking to that until I can prove to myself that further information is available that I can trust. But every day goes by, I find myself trusting less and less. I trust government absolutely zero. I trust mainstream media absolutely zero, although I know in the wings there are top-class investigative journalists that are hanging to get into this story and cover the real aspects of it, but they don't have a network that will publish it or put it to air. I've lost faith in the bureaucrats that are running this issue. I've lost faith in the corporations that are pushing mandates, and the stores and other services that are saying only the people who've followed the narrative can go in and everyone else is excluded. I can understand lots of reasons why you're doing that, but at the end of the day you will be held to account when the dust settles by a whole bunch of people you've excluded, and they are in the millions in this country, and what you're doing to them is just downright unbelievable. The situation we find ourselves now is that some state governments are just mandating willy-nilly. They're doing policy on the run. They're running like dictators, running like rabbits in front of the foxes, and they're making decisions that cannot be properly supported by the evidence that's available, nor by any legal aspect that applies to their decision making. The Australian Constitution has been completely trashed, and people are in a situation now where the document that's meant to protect them has great shadows of doubt over it. There are some people working on this Constitution and digging into the archives of the Australian Parliament that are finding that we may well be living under a Constitution that's completely and utterly irrelevant because this country has been run illegally for some years, and more information will come out about that, I'm sure. So we're in this awful situation. Where do we go from here? Well, you all have to make your own decisions, but you need to know that you will be loved and supported by a great many people, regardless of your decisions. If you're being coerced into accepting something you don't want in order to work for the company you continue to work for, then that company has lost a great deal because they've lost your spirit. And who can blame you for being that way? At the end of the day, we live in a country where corporations live outside the constitutional laws that prohibit governments from making decisions that corporations are making. It is illegal against the highest law in the land, the Australian Constitution, to mandate a vaccine. It's a medical apartheid. It's illegal. It's illegal to close off state borders under the Constitution, but that's being done willy-nilly. And we have an absolutely backboneless leadership in federal parliament at the moment that just don't seem to get a grip of that. They're quite happy for the corporations and the state henchmen to do their dirty work for them. So this is what we're putting up with in Australia. We're putting up with the fact that the rights we've enjoyed up until 18 months ago as Australian citizens, we've given away. We've handed over our rights and all the benefits that were fought and died for us over the last couple of centuries to give us the right to have the freedoms that we've just freely given away. We have imposed that draconian setup of losing all of our rights on our children. Our children and grandchildren will no longer be able to enjoy the benefits that we once had in this country. We've given that away, and we're putting that burden on them, and shame on us for doing that. I'm heartened by the number of people who have been followed this procedure and followed the government narrative regarding this medical procedure, but have made a decision that they need to stand for freedom because they don't like what's happening to the rest of us either, and they don't like that state governments can impose draconian police actions and bring in mandates that just don't make any sense. They don't like that many of you Australians are going to be out of work. Tens of thousands of teachers and nurses and doctors and pilots and flight attendants and FIFO workers. The FIFO guys, there's 5,000 in one group in the Pilbara who are fighting this mandate. 5,000 FIFO workers who are looking down the barrel of not having a job after December 1. Not only them, but truck drivers, people working in warehouses, factories, mechanics, people running businesses who have had to lay off staff. The list goes on and on and on. Paramedics, firefighters, police in Queensland, for example, 45% of Queensland police and 45% of health workers in that state have said no, they're not going to do it. Many police in Victoria and New South Wales are speaking out now and finding the courage to say enough's enough, and they're forming large groups. We're importing nurses and doctors from overseas at great expense at a time when our own people couldn't find their way home to Australia because they were locked out. We're bringing in foreign labour, which is nothing new to this country, to run our health system, which has completely and utterly been decimated, not by COVID, but more by mismanagement over the last few decades, where people haven't been able to get elective surgery done unless they're in a private health fund, and people have been on waiting lists for years, crippled in wheelchairs because they can't get joint replacements. The list goes on. It's madness. We have given up our manufacturing industry. We sat by as a nation of complacent people when dairy farmers were forced off the land because two supermarkets decided to have a war with $1 a litre milk. At the same time, you were paying $1 a litre for milk and forcing dairy farmers off the land so the big conglomerates could take over the dairy industry. You were paying $3 and $4 for a litre of water. I mean, it just doesn't make sense that we allowed that to happen. So we're seeing so much go down the drain in this country, and somewhere we have to make a stand. There will be an election next year. There will be a great many people running against the two-party system, or the 3 or 4 party system as it is. There'll be some independents, but there are a lot of minor parties, and they're getting ready. They're gearing up. They're forming cooperatives so that they can run, and they may even get to a stage where they may form government, or at least have control of the government. And that would be a great thing, because this government, federal and state, have let us all down very badly. They've allowed things to happen in this country that should never have happened. So where do we go from here? To all the people in aviation, I want to say this to you. There have been a number of attempts made to get the Civil Aviation Safety Authority to own up to its responsibilities. The Civil Aviation Safety Authority has been lacking badly. It is being run by bureaucrats who are just looking for the gravy train. I'm certain of that. They're not aviation-orientated people. They're, the head medical officer for the Civil Aviation Safety Authority has an interest in aviation, according to her profile. That's it, an interest. That's not enough. The head of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, Pip Spence, I'm sure she's a lovely lady, but she's inadequate to the task of running the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. So many pilots are in a situation where they have been asking questions of that authority to inform them as to whether they can operate safely in aircraft around the world and also over our own country. Not only does that apply to pilots, but it also applies to high altitude workers like cabin crew. And I want to read you some questions that have been posed to the Civil Aviation Safety Authority and I believe to Qantas. And these questions have been posed by thinking pilots who have approached medicos, designated medical examiners for aviation, with these questions, and they want these questions answered before they can give an informed consent. Now, these questions are reasonable and they can apply to any industry that you would like to think of. So let me read you some of them. For those of you who think that educated, well-trained, highly respected people just make a decision to end their career for nothing, have a listen to these questions and ask yourself if you've been able to ask these questions, and if you have you been given any answers? Because if you have, can you let us know, because we're not getting them. The first question is, will this vaccine prevent me from contracting or transmitting COVID-19? If vaccination does not prevent me from transmitting the disease, how does my taking it enhance workplace safety? Am I at higher risk of a more severe COVID symptoms if I am exposed to the virus after being vaccinated? What are the long-term effects of provisional use mRNA vaccines, and how long have these vaccines been studied in humans for? Are you aware that recent biodistribution studies are showing that vaccine-derived spike proteins are accumulating in other organs away from the injection site, in contradiction to the manufacturer's guidelines? Can you please inform me of all short-term, medium and long-term contradictions and potential side effects of the vaccine, both temporary and permanent? These are valid questions. Why are the vaccines only provisionally approved in Australia, and how many studies have been completed in humans? What would the effect of vaccine-derived myocarditis, pericarditis, have on my health and my ability to hold a Class 1 aviation pilot's medical, which we have to pass, in my case, at over 60 every 6 months, or in the case of people under 60 every year, including stress ECGs? What are the likely health multiplier effects of participating in ongoing booster programs as dictated by official company policy? Policy is not law. If I am vaccinated, is there any medical reason to still wear a mask or practice social distancing? Are you aware of any high altitude studies performed by CASA prior to acquiescing to the use of the vaccination for aviators or since that time? No. What, if any, AVMED, aviation medical monitoring frameworks, exist for the aggregation of data relating to any short-term adverse effects of contraindications following vaccination? I suggest none, because we haven't had any answers to these questions. None. 2. Have the designated aviation medical examiners been issued with any specific advice surrounding the vaccine by the department itself, of which pilots have no visibility, yet which may be relevant? Is it medically advisable for pilots to be exercising the privileges of a Class 1 medical while participating in a clinical trial of a provisionally approved drug? What is your opinion from a medical ethics perspective of a vaccine being administered to a pilot who is being coerced with loss of livelihood? What is your ethical opinion on the Qantas policy requirement to link my Ausgov IHI individual healthcare identifier information to the company database in violation of doctor-patient confidentiality? This question has been posed to several designated medical examiners and to CASA. One gentleman who submitted these answers in advance to going to attend his medical was told that the doctor was not interested in answering any of these questions and no longer wanted to serve him. He was denied access to his doctor because he was asking these questions. Why can't the doctor answer those questions? Why can't the Civil Aviation Authority answer those questions? Pilots and flight attendants are working in a high-risk thrombotic environment when they go to high altitude, and to be testing a situation like this on them is downright dangerous without the proper checks and balances. When I was a captain, I had to do everything possible before departing to make sure that I could sign off the aircraft serviceability, the serviceability of my crew, cabin crew and the other pilot I flew with, and that I'd done a thorough check on all the weather and the fuel requirements to make sure I could complete the task safely. that procedure that I've lived by for all of my life in aviation has brought about a situation where I now wonder what on earth that was all about. If I can't continue to ask those questions in a probing way for this situation I find myself in medically, then what is it all about? How come all those procedures and operating procedures stand in place to protect us when we have this situation going on before COVID, but now that we have it, it's a different kettle of fish? So for me, it's quite clear. If these questions can't be answered, then we need to have an inquiry. The Civil Aviation Safety Authority needs to front up to a Senate inquiry and have these questions asked of them. And the sooner that's done, the better. So where do we find ourselves now? Pilots and cabin crew are looking down the barrel of losing their careers because they cannot abide by a situation where these questions cannot be properly and fully answered. Qantas can't answer those questions, and neither can the other airlines. And if the Civil Aviation Safety Authority and the health departments can't answer them, then what on earth are we doing here? What is the point? So there's a lot more coming on the aviation front. I can tell you that there's an exhaustive behind-the-scenes process going on at the moment, with documents being coordinated and evidence being gathered to take the Civil Aviation Safety Authority and the airlines to task. I can tell you that there have been pilots who have been maimed by this vaccine. I've been in touch with many of them who've contacted me since I did the video, and I can tell you also that many pilots are failing their medicals because of heart conditions, blood clotting and other issues. I'm aware of one pilot in Australia who has a continuation of a blood clot in his leg and has been given a letter of approval to say he can continue to fly as long as he remains in his harness, and he gives the captain a letter to say that he's been approved to fly. On what basis? On what basis? Safety in aviation is paramount. We do everything we can to monitor it and make sure that it works so that you, the travelling public, and the crews are not at risk. I firmly believe, and I'm not the only one, that this has been negated by a policy which has been designed just to get everything back in business. Some will say if we don't do this, then there will be no business to come back to. But let me tell you people, there's a big change coming in the next year around climate change, and if you think we're all going to be flying around the world going from one coffee shop to another, you've got another thing coming. If the reason you've done what you've done, made the decision you've made, is so that you can have smash avo on toast and a cappuccino at a riverside restaurant somewhere, then I suggest you need to do a bit more digging. So to all of you who are out there in no man's land at the moment, I will continue in whatever capacity that I'm given or that I have to try and be your voice with the many others who are coming forward to speak up for you as best we can, but mostly to love and support you through this. I ask you all to please form groups, and I ask you in the capacity of forming groups that you're compassionate to each other and those who don't believe the way that you do either. It's vitally important that we continue in a circle of love and trust and compassion with all people and get the spirit of our country back. Once again, it's a pleasure talking to you. I'm dressed up in a tie because I'm about to do an interview that's an international interview with a panel of people who are believing the same sorts of things that we are. And I want you to know that you're not alone. You are most definitely not alone, nor will you be. You will be loved and supported. And once again, I beg you, please, if you don't get a response from me, please know that the reason is because we just don't have the time. We're too busy working to achieve what we want to achieve. You are surrounded by great people who have a real heart to support you and care for you and get some of this garbage sorted out as soon as possible. I personally look forward to the next federal election with great zeal. So with that all said, may God grant you the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things that you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. In the meantime, keep loving and supporting one another, stay close, you are not alone, and stay out of the trees. God bless you, and I'll talk to you in a few days. Bye for now.